Whoa, you actually did it. Well, let's just say I wasn't looking forward to my new life pretending to be a robot on Callias after my sudden disappearance. The robot army is falling back and Galactron is on a backup power supply. So now we go on the offensive while we still have the momentum. That won't be necessary. We already got someone else who specializes in siege warfare. We both know the answer to that, and at this rate I think old Galactron is finished. Looks like it. We here at Zork Industries are grateful for your diligent work ethic and are happy to call you part of our figurative family, yada yada yada. This all is being processed into your account as we speak, and a little bonus for shouldering part of the robo-assault on your own. Nah, I won't tell anybody if you don't. If I were to guess, mass reprogramming. They could make great service bots. Have you ever seen a functional clunk unit? We could make a killing selling those in bulk. Zork Industries won't take any precautions that are labeled a misuse of solar. One of the few things they're strict on over here. I'll be doing what I can to push for giving the robots a kill switch or 7 just in case, but as it stands, the disaster is over. And now we're just on cleanup. Memory wipes of friendly robots, forfeiture of any footage, and signing of NDAs, the usual. By tomorrow, nearly no one will ever know this happened, and those who do will be unable to connect it to us. Well, I guess the nightmare will be all too real for the guys who have to do paperwork and data expungement. Oh well. Not my department.
Oh, that was pretty fun. So what do I got? Maybe... I'll do that one later. How about Blightnauts? Hello everyone, it's Niz. It's been a while since... hang on, let me skip the intro. It's been a while since I've talked about an Awesomenauts mod, but that's not due to there not being any worth talking about. You know my love for Rise of Galactron, I have an enjoyment for Galaxy War, and a soft spot for Tedropolis. But the subject of today is one I've been putting tons of hours into recently, and that is Blightnauts. This game mode changes a few things about Awesomenauts, like Rise of Galactron. It has so many bots that it can't have them registered as actual Awesomenauts as to bypass the engine's limitations. This, once again, has side effects, namely that abilities that target enemy Awesomenauts will not hit them, but if they have an alternate effect on droids, that will proc. But if you buy an upgrade or if there's an effect to your ability that deals more damage to enemy Awesomenauts but can hit droids, that effect will occur. This means stuff like Rail and Snipe will deal full damage to enemy Awesomenauts even though they're technically not Awesomenauts. But Snork's shell bombs will not explode on enemy Awesomenauts because it has to register them as Awesomenauts for that extra damage to go off. The Ronatech engine's kinda weird.
But I think the single hardest thing was to test host migration. It would mess a lot of things up, and we had to do a lot, and really a lot of testing, going back and forth between test versions, me and Clement, doing a lot of testing, trying what worked and didn't work, and in the end, we actually found a way to make host migration work through and not break the map. But it was a lot of testing, and definitely the hardest part in the whole project.
This may make it seem like some knots are weak or even inoperable in this mode, and although some are a lot less strong, I assure you that many knots can still perform well down in ability. Part of this can be attributed to the fact that you can buy 4 upgrades per row instead of 3, raising the possibility of new builds or select abilities being significantly stronger. I was genuinely shocked how well Eula performed. Blightnauts is a mode built to be based off of Ronimo's new game Blightbound, and as such it has 1 to 6 Awesomenauts pushing through an assortment of obstacles and trials blocked off by a strange mist until you reach the lair of the accursed Mega Clunk. Although this game is modeled around Blightbound, it's mostly a theme as the game is still focused around the mechanics of Awesomenauts, but with Blightbound-inspired enemies and some obstacles and puzzles to mix things up in between checkpoints. This is honestly surreal to me because this is the type of stuff I wanted from Awesomenauts story mode years ago, but it's larger and more ambitious than that mod ever was. To be fair, that mod is several years old and had no mod support, but it's still amazing to see what this type of genre for Awesomenauts has become.
Wasn't there couldn't you give a character a amount of armor or something as extra health?
The armor, that armor thing, that's basically the name I gave to the script. It was called armor because it was originally intended to be armor, but then I realized that I could actually do a whole health system based on this, so the name stuck. But originally the idea was to apply armor. Yes.
Oh.
I see.
So basically, it keeps it on a variable inside the script, and then when that variable reaches 0, it kills the character. But as long as the variable is greater than 0, it just keeps healing the character back to full.
Similar to Rise of Galactron, a lot of strategy is centered around having a consistent amount of multi-targeting damage, but instead of being CC heavy as Rise of Galactron is, when fighting the hordes of enemies, you're better off with survivability. So an Awesomenaut's merit can typically be measured based off of the combination of whether they can regain health quickly, how mobile they are, and the means they have of mitigating damage. This leads to a different set of priorities on what makes a strong character in Blightnauts. Although Smiles can solo Galactron hard mode, it's much harder to solo Blightnauts as his sustain is low and unreliable, and his tail whack, although a good form of disengage, is not nearly enough to keep him safe with his lack of mobility. Meanwhile, Scolder is nowhere near as powerful damage-wise, but can very safely complete Blightnauts due to his heavy amount of sustain, ability to throw away just about any problem that he doesn't want to tackle head-on, and the ability to deflect projectiles, stopping him from being whittled down like other melee-nauts like him. Although they vary drastically in completion times, just about every Naut can complete the game solo on normal difficulty. Yes, this mod has difficulties, and the total difficulty score is affected by 2 variables, the difficulty that one selects and the amount of players in the game. This can vary between 1 to 6 players, as the game is set to put players on blue team to also be on red team. These difficulty modifiers can be compared to Killing Floor. Enemies' numbers and the health multipliers of bulkier enemies will scale based off this difficulty modifier, as well as the upgrades they get, which can drastically change strategies you take against them, but not to an unfair extent, as every Naut you face is designed to be heavily telegraphed in their behavior. Once you understand how they all function, you can figure out exactly how to tackle each one. The difficulty doesn't stop at the changes in gameplay though, as it happens to also change visuals. The map will become more menacing based off the difficulty you're playing at. A very nice touch. This does lead to something worth noting, however, and that is that the mode can get rather repetitive with its enemies when played a lot. There's no random generation in spawns except for the final boss, and those are still pre-made spawn groups, and higher difficulties just raise the numbers and intensity of the areas. So there isn't a lot of replay value in that aspect. The replay value comes from which Nauts you and your friends play. You will require different strategies to tackle these enemies, and things that weren't problems in other runs will be much higher threats than others. And just how powerful an Awesomenaut is can vary from difficulty and team size. But I wouldn't count on every run being the same forever, as the developers have spoken about plans on making a potential branching path. Which sounds like a big promise, and if you have any doubt on it, I'd like to demonstrate how this mod had grown from patch to patch. But for now, the biggest options are team comps, and who you give solar. The sharing solar system is a small but important feature, as the amount of solar the team gets increases due to the enemy's face and the amount of solar dropped from the barrels. This, along with a button, will allow you to pick who on your team gets the most solar, and this can lead to a myriad of strategies. You might not give as much solar to Scoop because he does just fine with the minimum amount, and will survive a lot just fine alone. You might invest heavily into Genji because the buffs his blessing can provide are incredibly helpful for keeping everyone alive.
In case you're curious how this works, it just spawns a creep and then a droid and kills the droid instantly.
But that's not the only thing that can vary in your experience, as the game itself has added dialogue through speech boxes, and they have a lot of variation in not only what they say, but the person who assigns your job. And it also has little details on how the employer addresses them, saying something about how they see the Naut. For example, in Raylan or Chucho's mission, it's very standard, professional even. But due to Ksenia's lore, Zork will make up how she's in a hair salon fighting a rival store. In Skoldir's, he was thrown down there by Slow Wolf in hopes that he'd never have to face him again, but unfortunately for him, Skoldir is actually one of the better Nauts in this mode. Does this mean, canonically speaking, in the Blightnauts universe he forced Slow Wolf to do a 24-hour Skoldir stream? Put that in the wiki. The amount of variation in stories of why each Naut is here shows a level of dedication, and not only that, but how some characters speak differently based on their skins. A fantastic example is that Bravely Scoop is facing the Blight as an RPG, and even the details made to the prompt for him to retrieve a key. There's also Yulip, who quite possibly is my favorite for the simple fact that he dropped in here and happened to hunt down the source of the Blight and inadvertently saved the world with no formal guidance. Just bumbling around. Who are those fish? Their treasure looks interesting. What if I just, killed them all? This isn't even including the final boss of the game, which is a giant animated boss that spawns enemies, can drop missiles on platformed areas, or laser on rows of the map until you leave it in a vulnerable spot to attack the core. This boss has had a lot of tweaking and improvements over the development of the game, and frankly, if they only had the Mega Clunk here and the rest of the content was not present, this would be a very impressive mod. But the fact that there's all this other content tied to it makes it astonishing rather than impressive. There has been an extensive level of care that has gone into making this mod, some of which I haven't even caught during multiple runs.
The scary eye is here in the top.
The eyes.
Wait mode.
I think you need to move away.
There it is.
But if you go close, they'll be scared.
Oh!
The red eyes moves up.
Did they just look frightened? Did they see that correctly?
They look frightened at first.
Yeah, and then they drop.
They look angry at first, but then if you go near
Oh, there you go. Hey.
That's like something I'd see in
need
Spiral
that.
Knights. That's great. One of my goals now is to try to speedrun it. Unfortunately, it's been a mixed bag since my previous attempts, as the boss, enemy spawning, and attack patterns are randomized. I can't imagine an effective and quick approach against the Derple, a deadlift protecting the Derple, 2 lone stars on separate sides of the map, and the boss's firing lasers that have an incredibly high chance of making it pretty much impossible to tackle at any given time. Oh, and Ayla is chasing you during all of this. Dude, I'm just a bee. But even outside of speedrunning, playing it co-op with friends on Impossible and for us to slowly but surely make progress in our methods and strategies has been a genuinely fun time. So much fun that I was honestly gonna ask some of my close friends to run a 6-man on normal. They don't play as not as much as I do, and having a good time. I do have some friends who might not be able to run it though. But wait. There's Blightnauts Lite, and its scenery and textures are reduced, and text boxes are removed so that it's less intensive on simplistic hardware.
The dialogue is something that, in hindsight, if I knew this was going to break, this was something that I would never do. But now that it's done, we have to roll with it. I'm not going to delete the work that we have done, but...
And a lot of dialogue lines are a bit lazy, in my opinion.
Well,
Which I was
There
actually
comes the
skeptical.
point.
Yeah.
There comes the point where you're just like, oh god.
There's
key.
so much dialogue out there. But
Also,
honestly,
Also, single player has different stories as well, and some
yes.
Yeah,
some
I noticed that.
some characters have special stories. I know that the 8-bit Julep makes it so that he's playing a VR game from Ayla.
I haven't seen that one yet.
So, but talking on what you were mentioning, Clement, when I realized that animating all these texts is on each bubble of dialogue is like a different animation. Each animation has you have to edit the text with Notepad or something. When I realized it was going to be so much work to do everything, and each animation has to have a different duration because a longer line needs to last longer so people can read it, etc.
And you have to make sure they don't overlap.
Yes. All of that, I realized it was going to be so much work. And one of the things I realized a long time ago was that if you take the time, if you realize something is going to take a lot of time, then it's usually better to build a tool, to program a tool outside of that. Spend some time on that tool and then use that tool to automate everything. And that's what I did. I put on my programmer hat and just build a tool that actually automates everything. You put in the text, you put in the duration, and it generates all the files that the game wants.
That's
the game
amazing.
knows.
And it makes it easier for me
So you can
as well.
technically have community members write dialogue for you. Am I hearing slave labor on the horizon?
Well,
He was-
there was plans on actually publishing the tool, making a public version of it a bit more user friendly and publishing it. But when I look, it's and this comes back exactly to when I first said when I started talking about the dialogue. Dialogue breaks the game. There's like over 1,000 different in-game elements required, like invisible buttons in order to store the state of each character as they talk.
Since the AI has to trigger a button, I suppose that shows on animation, and each button is one animation. So since there are so many possibilities of.
Yes, there's like over 1,000 buttons, invisible buttons, just for that. And that breaks the game for people with slower connections or slower computers.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, but if a player host has weird or bad connection with an other, then it can do really, it can just crash at startup and every time it happens. Not with everyone, but it's really weird.
Yes, and when we started testing, we actually had several people here on this Discord that
Yeah, that had this problem, but not
They had-
everyone.
They had this problem, and we had to constantly have to invite these people.
Yes,
We didn't know if they were available or not. Yeah.
And we didn't know what was causing the problem.
Yes. There was a point where I was literally tearing my hair out because I had no idea what was
Same.
going on. I thought it was the textures. I stripped the map completely naked, just using the default textures and everything. It was still happening. I was literally to the point of tearing my hair out. And then we decided, what if we delete all of these 1,000 invisible buttons used for the dialogue? And it actually worked.
And we did that before, or I say to do that, to deactivate the buttons, but you didn't delete them, you just deactivate the AI, but the buttons were still in the map.
Because we had no idea. We had no idea that it was the actual buttons themselves that were causing the problem. We thought it was the AI. This game engine is weird at times. Let's just say that.
And that's a big deal to me because even though I'm not running on a crappy PC anymore, that was my life in Knots for the first 1,000 hours. One of the greatest appeals of Awesome Knots is that it's easy to run, so this probably opens the gates for a lot of players. And man, I didn't realize how many problems the text boxes had surfaced. It was well deserving in the position of being a brawl mode, even with the hiccups in getting it there. But the coolest thing about it to me is as great of a mod as it is, it can only improve from here, and I admit I'm pretty excited to see what could come next as I try to get better at this game mode. That's all there is to talk about for now, so I hope you all have a good day, and be safe.
And any message to the wider community?
A huge thanks, especially before 1.0. All the different people that had to test and put up with the inferior versions that were constantly full of bugs, especially bugs related to the last puzzle and whatnot.
I mean, that's
so a huge thank to everyone. That's
and everyone who played, also after who supported.
That's wholesome. I'm leaving that in especially.
Hey, and what message do you have to people that die on easy mode in Brawl?
Get good.